Hello everyone, I am Jonathan, also known as the Medieval Genie. Now, some of my regular viewers, I'll talk more in detail about my hiatus and all that later, but just quickly, yes, I made these axes and there'll be some stuff to do with them. I will talk at the end about why I was on a hiatus for so long and different stuff going on, but for everyone else, I'm going to get straight into our topic at hand, which is a sort of sword and shield combat with a focus on sword and buckler. So I'll condense that right to the very basics. For starters, sword and buckler, I don't need to patronise you on what a sword is, but for a buckler, that is a small type of shield, which is held in a centre grip like this, so it's not a strapped shield, it's a single grip shield, which is a very important detail that I'll go into in a minute. And the typical size is anything from like around a pot lid type of thing. There are lots of different versions, and you've got larger versions and smaller versions. Smaller versions could be so tiny that they barely cover the fist itself because someone's very confident in their defence of it, or perhaps they prefer how light it is, or different details like that. Maybe it's easier to carry around. The larger ones, you can start getting into some, I'm sure, riveting debates between historians about where is the threshold between something just being a small buckler and being a proper shield. Don't care at the moment, maybe another time. For now, we'll say something like this: small shield, centre grip. Now, this presents an important detail, and part of what's kicked me into gear is finding some of that difference when I went to a tournament in Wessex League. So if any of you look at the HEMA ratings, looking at me as Jonathan Green, you'll notice, yeah, I didn't do that well, I lost. But there we are, I lost more fights than I won, and that's because of specific details I'll go into in a minute. So, with the stuff that I learnt while I was there. Now, one of the things that differentiates a larger shield from the smaller shield is basically to do with the size and requirements for hand accuracy and also the degree of the positioning. So, firstly, I'm going to talk about the hand accuracy. So if I get this shield, if I have, or in fact, no, I'll start with the larger shield. If I have one of these types of shields, let's say someone's attempting a thrust centre line, just trying to take my heart out. Now, with the shield, yes, there is a degree to which the further forward you present the shield, the more it guards you. I'll be talking more about that in the next section. But overall, with a larger shield, even one as small as this Taj that I purchased, if someone was aiming, let's say, centre line, if I'm roughly, approximately in the right area to where they are attacking, this sort of larger shield will block it or deflect it in some fashion, and that is fine. Now, this is not so much the case with a buckler, and this was something I learnt the hard way, and is part, I'd say, the primary reason why I lost, a lack of hand accuracy. So, ostensibly, I was doing the right things. Like I'd see perhaps someone was trying to get that sword point in and dig into my shoulders, oh boy, so I'll move the shield up and to the left slightly and that should cover it, right? Now with a larger shield, yes it would. You're approximately in the right area, the sword is coming in, you've timed it right so you haven't gone too early and they're going to change, to a completely different target. So that's supposed to work, and no, I've still gotten stabbed. And that's because of a lack of hand accuracy. So I would be in approximately the right area, but someone who's very skilled with sword and buckler will find their way just a couple of inches around outside of your buckler and still get that hit in. They'll even start to adjust slightly as they see your defence coming in when they're really good at it, and I saw it happening. So I'd be, I'd think, okay, I see the thrusts coming in, they're going to attempt to catch around that sort of armpit or shoulder area. I will raise that shield and cover that area. In the meantime, I'm going to try a centerline thrust of torso, see what happens. So I'd try my thrust, their hand accuracy is good, I meet their shield. I'm intercepting, or I think I'm intercepting, and it doesn't work because they've sneaked around just a little fraction over the edge of my shield and have thrust me and landed their hit. So that tiny adjustment, that little bit, makes a difference between intercepting a hit and being hit, which of course with a larger shield you're just simply more broadly in the area that you need to be defending. And the larger the shield, yes, the heavier and slower it is, but the more it passively covers a part of your body, to the point where with the largest shields you're just sort of dedicating something like upper left, upper right, lower left. You know, you're thinking a lot more broadly in what parts of the body you're covering, and it will just wholesale stop that part from being attacked, as long as someone hasn't found the way, you know, and basically like manipulated their shield in close play or something unusual like that. So, on to the part about the grips. This is an interesting point that I found. It's not something I learnt specifically at Wessex, but it's an interesting detail in terms of the differentiation between some of the strapped shields and a buckler. So, this shield is, of course, physically smaller than this shield. However, when I'm cutting forwards, or when I'm marrying the sword and the shield together, meaning I'm keeping the hands together and I'm presenting it forwards. Now look at this. With this centre grip shield, if let's say I'm facing sideways to give you an easier look, and I've cut towards my opponent, so I've gone in one action. Now, look at where I am in terms of the sword hand and the shield hand are right next to each other right now. I'm basically matching the knuckles to each other. So open it up. Yep. So, look at this. I have landed with my shield. It is covering a few inches in front of the hilt. So I was probably up to, I think I was up to about here. Now watch this. This will probably surprise you. This is a bigger shield. I perform an identical action. Huh! Now, this time, I am actually further back. So I've only gone to about, let's see, yeah, here. So I'm slightly in front of where the grip is. Now that's an important detail. With these shields, and it can even apply to the largest shields depending on where the straps are arranged, sometimes the difference that you'll notice in terms of how far forwards you present that shield will actually be less than you realise when you're using a strapped shield, whereas it will be noticeably more when you're using a centre grip shield. Now this will present itself very extremely when you're using something like an early medieval, say Anglo-Saxon style of shield, that even with something as small as a buckler, you can still notice a difference, and it's very useful when you're doing things like that I-33, 133 Tower manuscript. Same name for all, the same kind of style, but it's late 1200s, early 1300s, sword and buckler, and from what I've seen in the treatise, there's less of that Bolognese style separation, like let's say I cut to the knee, guard the head, and it's something like this. So there's a separation between the two actions. It's more like I'm keeping the objects together in a lot of actions and doing something like this. So I'm presenting the objects together as though my wrists have been bound. And both styles have their advantages and disadvantages, and for actual combat mix them up, I'd recommend, and see what works. But it does mean that there are different dynamics. So with a strapped shield, I might find I'm barely covering my hands, whereas with a centre grip on a small buckler, I am actually still doing a lot of coverage. Very useful, because if I want to give that point, the cut or thrust forward, there's the vulnerability of the sword hand itself, and to a hand carver like me, you've got multiple angles at which you can wound your opponent, even staying back out of range where you cannot cut or thrust to each other's head or torso areas, but because they're presenting their arms forward, you can actually cut their hands wide open. This is where something like a buckler comes in handy. Before the advent of a sort of a bowl like you'd get on a military sabre, to protect the hands properly when you're using a sword on its own, you've got something like a little buckler, marry it up together, so you're doing your normal actions, but you're just doing it behind the safety of the shield, so that you've got the actual blade guarding your main body, and in terms of that very vulnerable forward presented hand or arm, got that shield to add a layer of safety. Very useful, and it does make all the difference. And I noticed there were people who were able to... They didn't do it very much. Most of the people were separating because they were doing more side sword than arming sword with their buckler. So they were separating them a lot more. But the few times that they did marry it up, yes, it very much kept their hands safe. And it was no longer a viable target, and I'd have to completely, choose a separate location. I couldn't just attack their weapon arm anymore, which meant I had to commit deeper and put myself further into danger to actually find a valid target, which gives them a strategic advantage. So that's some stuff to think about in terms of sword and shield combats, especially sword and buckler. I hope you found that useful. Ta-ra for now. So, in terms of the stuff that's been going on, yeah, apologies, I've been away for a while. I'd bitten off more than I can chew. I can't go into exact details because someone might take the idea and do something before I do an intercept. But I was thinking of a larger project that would have a good viewership, and it would have been brilliant, possibly one of the best projects I'd ever done. But I'd bitten off more than I could chew, and it was daunting to the point where I'd just give up every time I tried. But that project may still happen, especially since the circumstances that make that video happen haven't changed for the moment. But yeah, so I've been a bit distracted by... There's that. There was the fact that other things were going on with work and with HEMA, doing tournaments and other stuff. And also, just, yeah, getting distracted by games like, Mountain Blade, Bannerlord. Project Zomboid. Nomiko. Other things like that. But to answer one of the questions that may be on your minds, if you're more, regular viewers, did I make these? Yes, I did. So, I'll quickly go over them. I will do more dedicated videos. This is a temporary handle. It's an old bit of fir or something, fir tree. It's quite light and I do believe fairly brittle. But it's just a temporary haft until I get something like an ash haft fitted, or I can't be bothered and I just don't ever do it. But this is made from spring steel, same as the swords. This one is a riveted design, and you can see this is a fighting axe design. It's quite thinner on the blade, so it's very light. It chops quite heftily, but yet this design, despite the fact that it can hit quite hard, and I've tested it against some wood, it does chop quite monstrously. It's quite light and nimble. I could wield this quite easily and effectively. So this is more of a fighting axe design, and then this is more of a combo. So this is a thicker blade, so you'll look down here. So this is not a riveted design. You'll see the attachment there. You see no rivets or screws or anything like that. This is forge welded. It's same kind of spring steel as the last one. It's got a thicker blade design, so although it gets thinner towards the actual edge, so it's not as hefty as your typical hatchet, but this one is a more durable design that I would be happy cutting wood with, regularly. It's got a fine enough edge. It can cut, if something like test cutting on bottles. It can chop wood. I'm happy with it, and this is also the final design of the haft. So you might notice there's a wedge in here. The camera's not going to find it very easily, but it's basically got a wedge of something like pine. And then the main haft is made from, I think, ash. This was from sapling wood, and I just simply ground it and, sanded it into the shape that I wanted. The original haft was, the original stave was quite curved, so I was grinding bits off of the parts protruding, so I tried to make it so that the overall shape, when I'd narrowed it down, had come up much straighter than the original very curved stick that it was. I've done a reasonable job, but it does still curve off in this direction slightly. But I'm happy with it. Again, it's quite light, nimble, it's durable, I reckon, from what I've tested so far. It handles nicely, it chops heftily, it's not too heavy. The haft is a bit longer than you typically see on a hatchet, so it'd be better for the leverage on doing things like test cutting, but it's not so long that I wouldn't want to bring it into, you know, something like the woodlands, well, like the campsites or places where I'd be allowed to bring an axe and keep using that. Yeah, it's fun. So I might do some test cutting of those. And you know what? I might also do a video talking about this sword, which is one that I bought from Gvetten. And also there was a sabre that I brought from the same guys. Might do a review and talk more about those later. But for the meantime, thank you for staying around, and I'll try to upload more videos. Ta-ra!